last time we talked, you and I mentioned about working at radio stations, and the first radio station I worked at was in a really small town called Bad Axe, Michigan. And later in life, I lived in a small town called Eau Claire, Michigan, which was even smaller. But however, the first time moving from the big city of Birmingham, Michigan, to Bad Axe, Michigan was a culture shock. And it took me a while to really understand the differences between big city living and small town living. And some of it really baffled me. Like literally the day I got to town, I went to the radio station to use their phone to call about rentals and apartments and so on out of the local newspaper. So I bought a local newspaper, went into an office, picked up the phone, and no matter what number I dialed, I couldn't get through. So finally I asked somebody, because it wasn't like there was like a complicated phone system there. This is the early 1980s, but nothing crazy. And I said, how come I can't get any of the local numbers to ring? They said, well, what are you dialing? And I said, well, I'm dialing the phone number. They go, oh, no. You don't need to dial all 7 numbers. This is Bad Axe. Just dial the 9 and then the 4 digits that follow it. I said, what? They said, yeah, all the phone numbers are 269, 1234. Just dial the 9, 1234, and it'll get through. I go, really? They go, yeah. And they're looking at me like I was stupid. So I don't know these things, you know. I mean, my grandmother had a party line, but that was in Alston, Michigan, back in the 1960s and 70s. Okay, but so I managed to eventually rent an apartment, lived there for a year and a half, worked in the radio, and while I was living there, I mean, I was learning a lot being on the radio, and that was a lot of fun for me to get my first job in radio and actually be being paid to spin records and talk. Although I was playing country music, which I was not a big fan of, but I'm up there. And you have to understand that, again, small town, there are 2 pharmacies in town, Dibbles and Higbee. I kid you not. Dibbles Pharmacy and the Higbee Pharmacy. And by the way, they're both advertisers. So I used to run ads for Dibbles and Higbee. And I went through town a couple years ago. I don't think they're there anymore, but they used to be right there on Main Street. But I remember, for instance, that to get a phone, you had to call up the phone company and then go pick up the phone at the local pharmacy. And I forgot if it was Dibbles or Higbee, one of the two. And I remember going in there to pick up my phone from the pharmacist. So you go to the back of the store and you say, hi, I'm here to pick up my phone. And they ask you for your name and identification. And they hand you the phone and you go home and plug it in. But anyway, the town of Bad Axe had a population of about 3,000. Which is huge compared to Eau Claire, Michigan, where I lived later. It had a population of 600. But 3,000 is still a pretty small town. And again, I came from a town, Birmingham, which is down in a suburb of Detroit. And so I was not used to the idea that everybody knew everything about everybody. And so I'm new in town. And one day I had problems with my sink in my kitchen, in my rental, in the old hospital, which is the building that my apartment was in. And I went into the store and I bought some Drano. And I used the Drano on my sink. And I go into work, as I always did, around 5 o'clock. And I walk in the front door and the receptionist goes, oh, trouble with your plumbing? Now, I hadn't been on the radio that day. I had not talked about this to anybody. All I had done was go to the store and buy some Drano. And I hadn't even spoken to the cashier. So I looked at Pat, who was the receptionist. I'm pretty sure is still there today, but she was there for decades after I left. And I said, how'd you know? And she goes, oh, my next door neighbor is a cashier at the store, whatever, I forgot what store it was. And I thought to myself, okay, but Pat has been here all day. I went to the store earlier today, got the Drano, came home and used it, came in here. For Pat to know that means that her neighbor had to either call somebody and tell them, or get off work, go home, and then call Pat and say, oh, I saw that Steve Lehto guy, that evening disc jockey of yours, buying Drano today. I suspect he's having trouble with his sink. So some people find this charming. I find it kind of creepy. So I started shopping out of town as best I could. But one of the things that really always kind of amused me, and at the time it wasn't amusing, but a lot of these stories are amusing later when you look back on them. But I was renting an apartment for $200 a month, literally $200 a month, and I had an apartment in a building called the Old Hospital. The Old Hospital is still there, but I think it's not being used for anything. I drove by it not so long ago. It's all overgrown and stuff and clearly not being used anymore. So if you got your mail there, which most people did, there was a collection of mailboxes at the end of the hallway by the front door to the old hospital. And so I trying to remember what my apartment was, 1A, I think, or 2A or something. It was a very low number with a letter. And I would go down to get my mail after the mailman had been there. And there'd be mail just jammed in boxes because some people never got their mail, apparently. I think some of the apartments were not being used and nobody emptied those mailboxes. But then also there were children who lived in the apartment with their families who would play in the hallway, especially in the wintertime. And they would go down and they'd grab mail out of the mailboxes and play with it. And so a couple of times I went down looking for my mail, and a little kid would sheepishly come by and go, "Is any of this yours?" And fan it like a deck of cards, Yeah, that, and that are mine, thank you. So after I discovered that the mail at the mailboxes was not terribly dependable, I went to the post office and I said, "How much for a P.O. box?" And they gave me a price and it wasn't that much. And so I got a P.O. box. So I'm pretty sure my address was P.O. Box 72, Bad Axe, Michigan. I could be wrong about that, but that rings a bell. So I started telling everybody, if you need to write to me at my place in Bad Axe, don't write to the apartment. Write to me at the P.O. Box, P.O. Box 72. So for the first few days after that time, I start noticing that my mail is getting delivered to the P.O. Box. In fact, I put in a change of address form to change my address from the old hospital to the P.O. Box. And yet I discovered that after I did that, I still got stuff delivered to the address on East Irwin, which was the old hospital. Now, you might go, "But Steve, the forwarding order that gets messed up back in those days, who knows?" Well, here's the funny part. I worked at the radio station, which was 935 South Van Dyke. 935 South Van Dyke, also known as M53. And occasionally, I got things mailed to me at the radio station. In fact, I seem to recall that some of my friends, in fact, Tom, I believe, my good friend who went to U of M at that time, still friends with him to this day, would occasionally mail me stuff at the radio station as opposed to the P.O. Box or the old hospital. And so I'd come into the station and there'd be an envelope pinned to the bulletin board, and I'd look at it and say, "Oh, Steve Lehto, 935 South Van Dyke, care of WLEW," that kind of thing. Bad Axe, Michigan, 48413, I think. I could be wrong about that. If I'm wrong about that, I'll cut it out and you'll never know I mentioned it. However, the craziest thing started happening. I would come into work, and I'd find something pinned to the bulletin board, and it'd say, "Steve Lehto, P.O. Box 72, Bad Axe, Michigan." I would go to the apartment, go check the mailbox, and in my mailbox it'd say, "Steve Lehto, P.O. Box 72. And I'd go to the P.O. Box and I'd find stuff there labeled Steve Lehto, care of WLEW, 935 South Van Dyke. And so it got to the point where I had equivalent of 3 mailing addresses, all of them in Bad Axe, being used interchangeably by the mail carriers. And the town is big enough to where it wasn't just one mail carrier. It had to be more than one. First time it happened, I thought it was odd. Second time it happened, I thought that's a weird coincidence. Third, fourth, and fifth time, I'm like, wow, this is just bizarre. This is just bizarre. So one day, I took a bunch of these envelopes that were all misdelivered, but addressed to me, and I went into this post office to pick up my mail, and I go to my P.O. box, and I open it up, and I pull something out, and again, it's addressed to the wrong place. It's addressed to me at the radio station, but it's been delivered to the P.O. box. But I have with me ones that were sent to the other places also. So I walk up the front counter, and it's a quiet post office, and I walk up the front counter, and there's somebody there, and I said, "Hey, can I speak to the postmaster, please?" They said, "Sure." They called the postmaster over, and the guy goes, "Yeah, what can I do for you?" I go, "My name's Steve Lehto. I work at the radio station." He says, "Hey, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you." I go, "I got a question for you." I go, "I have a P.O. box. I've got an apartment. I work at the radio station." I laid them on the counter, and I go, "It doesn't matter where they're addressed. They get sent to different places. The apartment gets sent to the P.O. box. P.O. box gets sent to the radio station gets sent to the P.O. box. What are we going to do about this?" And he looks at me and goes, "Well, it's you, ain't it?" Now, it's true. It was me. I said, "But the reason I got the P.O. box was because my mail at my apartment's not dependable." The guy looks at me and goes, "What do you mean it's not dependable?" I go, there's kids take the mail out, stuff gets misdelivered. I don't know. And he goes, you got these, didn't you? And I go, yeah, but I don't know if there's anything else that I didn't get. And he goes, no, you got it all. I go, so in the future, if I ask you, could we have the stuff addressed to the P.O. box, sent to the P.O. box, and the stuff sent to the radio station? And he goes, why? You still got it? I thought to myself, oh, okay, that's true. I did still get it, but I have no idea. I am convinced that there was mail that I never got up there because it was misaddressed and then misdelivered. It was addressed properly, but misdelivered. And if it got misdelivered to the apartment complex, there's a good chance some kids were playing with it and lost it. But I don't actually know that for a fact. But I do suspect it happened. But that's the kind of thing when people who've never lived in a small town don't understand is that you can go to the store and buy Drano, not exchange a word with the cashier. Go into work 3 hours later and somebody there knows about it. And somebody went out of their way to tell that person about it. And when this mail's being sorted, apparently they go, oh, Steve Lehto gets that. They don't even bother looking at the address. Apparently Steve Lehto gets that. So there you go. Some of the more interesting highlights of my life in Bad Axe. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.